I'll just start out by saying that I'm Kristen Hull, and I am the founder and CIO at Nia Impact Capital, and we are thrilled to have you here today. We are welcoming both our staff members and also Meredith Benton, who is our partner from Whistle Stop Capital, and we're going to be sharing a little bit about our journey with shareholder engagement. We'll be highlighting some of the accomplishments, some of the challenges, and we'll also be looking at what's ahead, what's happening this year, why is the investor voice so important? It's always been important, and why does it feel even that much more important now? So, welcome again, and thank you all for joining us today. Meredith, I'm going to pass it to you to get us started. And if you would just say also a little bit about your firm, and then I think we'll probably talk a little bit about how we began our partnership and maybe share some of the stories from the beginning days when we first started working together, way back when.
That sounds great. So, hi everyone. I'm Meredith Benton. I lead a research and analytics firm called Whistle Stop Capital, and I know some of my team members are on the call today as well. We really focus in on what do sustainability issues mean for businesses and for their strategies, and then particularly how should investors be thinking about these different sustainability topics as they assess companies and then as they hold companies. We look at it both at the company level and then also at a systemic level to understand what are the broader societal implications of these investments. And we're really, Nia in particular is really thinking about the world they want to build. And so we are very considered with these companies. We've done a lot of great work with Nia over the years. It's been absolutely wonderful. The types of things that we've been able to, the positive change that we've been able to help encourage at companies. And we've certainly had a lot of shared experiences along the way. So Kristen mentioned, back when we got started, and I was thinking about this, we have a pre-pandemic relationship. So the world that we've been operating in has changed very significantly since when we first started. Kristen, if you're comfortable with it, I'll start actually with a question to you, which is where does shareholder engagement, where does talking to the companies that Nia owns, how does that fit into what Nia is trying to do as a firm?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I'm really looking forward to this dialogue. And so, I think many of you know, though my early investor days, I was early stage angel investor, and I was investing in single entrepreneurs, oftentimes the first check in. And I was very used to and very comfortable with talking to founders, talking to the executive team, talking to the board of directors, and really learning about companies and then also voicing some of the ideas, standards, and issues that we saw as investors. And so when Nia started in public equities back in 2012, we carried forward that very same ethos that these are people behind the tickers and they are making big decisions, and that they, whether I guess I thought they needed to be in dialogue with their investors. And so, not all companies at that level, at that publicly traded level think that they want to be in dialogue, and yet we really do see that building a win-win relationship can be beneficial both to the companies and then to shareholders and of course ultimately to our clients. And so what you asked, what are we trying to achieve? We're looking to build a relationship. We want to know the people behind the tickers, and we want to know more than you can navigate from a Bloomberg printout or from an analyst write-up. We want to know really what is their forward thinking, how are they thinking about the issues at hand, how are they looking to grow their business, and of course, you and I unite, and Nia unites on the letters, the E, the S, and the G. So what do we find material often isn't found on a Bloomberg printout or on a 10K? And so asking those questions, whether it's about the environment, whether it's about social, whether that is human capital management or how companies are thinking about their communities, and then of course governance. We really want to know and really build trust that there is strong governance happening and that the companies have the very best practices. And of course, I have a background in Diversity, equity, inclusion is what we used to call it, and um, also systemic change. And so, understanding some of these systemic issues, we want to bring those and be in conversation with our companies about that. And then, working with Whistle Stop, we're really able to connect with more companies and come with a strategy about sharing with them best practices, sharing with them some of the research you're finding, some of the research that we have about almost benchmarking across their peers. So I would say it's a lot getting to know our companies better as far as due diligence, really just understanding more about who they are, what they're thinking about, how they're navigating current challenges, and what do they see is ahead as far as capturing market share, which is what we really need all of our companies to be doing. Um, and then there's that nudge. What we're really finding, and you've been really instrumental in supporting us with, is that the investor voice really is powerful. We see that shareholder engagement is both a right and then also a responsibility of investors to be engaged and to be supporting the issues that matter. And I'm going to love that we're going to jump into some of these actual stories and actual incidents as far as our work together, because we really have seen in a quantifiable way that the investor voice matters and that bringing up points, we need investors to be asking a very wide range of questions. And so it does matter, I believe, that we're a women-led firm asking some of these questions.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think what Nia is doing is so important into it's seeking to understand the companies that it invests in a deeper way, exactly than what folks who are just looking at Bloomberg could possibly see or understand. And then looking to strengthen the companies. I mean, these are organizations that you're invested in. Why wouldn't you try and help them improve around topic areas where there's an expertise you can bring that they might not have in-house? That's one of the main things we look to understand in our early conversations is there someone in-house who even understands some of these environmental or some of these social issues? Do you remember what it was like when we first started reaching out? Well, first when we started looking at the Nia portfolio, but then when we started reaching out to companies, I know there was a lot of concerns. Nia was smaller then. A lot of concerns about whether or not companies would even take the call.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's such a good point because we do get asked that all the time about, well, you're such a small firm. How could you possibly make a difference? And to your point, will they take our call? And it turns out they do for the most part. And so I'm curious your thoughts there. And then before we go kind of into how we get a hold of these companies and how we, and whether that's hard. And I'd love to start talking too about the transitions, just about we were sending paper letters and paper, we were printing out letters, and we always printed two copies, and we would send, to IR investor relations, and we'd also send to the board, and we would follow up with an email copy. So, times really have changed. Um, just jumping back in the pandemic, we were seeing that letters were getting lost, or they were saying they were getting lost, or no one was checking the mail room because it was the pandemic. And so we've certainly experienced and overcome some pretty significant challenges, I think, in communicating with companies. But what I wanted to do just before we do that, I wanted to back up and just really share a little bit about how we work with companies, because it is quite different than a lot of what is known as shareholder activism. And I think activism has gotten kind of a bad name or a bad rap somehow, in that um, companies can see us as challenging them and possibly wanting to really change them. And I just want to be known that we really are, our entire investment thesis is that we are investing in the very best companies and helping them to get better. So we start by identifying companies that have revenues coming from one or more of our six solution themes. And we also have a criteria that all of our companies include diversity and leadership across the executive team and the board of directors. And I mention that because we're already very pleased, for the most part, with what our companies are doing, how they are baked. We understand that their products and services, when they are growing, will actually increase their impact. And we're really excited about that. So we want to help them be the very best they can be. Possibly it's in human capital management sometimes, and we'll get into all of this about whether it's tracking and reporting on their scope emissions or their water use. Etc. What I think is out there maybe as like, what is an activist investor? Chevron and Exxon come to mind because they've had quite a bit of press for activist investors wanting a board seat and wanting to, get more involved in the companies. And I mention that because we're not looking to change the business models. We really do believe in the business models of almost all of our companies. That's why we invested in them in the first place. Chevron's an easy one to pick on, but it's we're not saying you need to completely turn this ship around and diversify it and stop the oil spills on the way back. We're more saying we notice that you have these products and services that are beneficial to the economy, to society across our six solution themes, and we see you could do better at, XYZ. And are you tracking your scope emissions? Have you thought about reducing single-use plastics in your biomedical, et cetera? So I just wanted to kind of set the stage for the type of work that we are embarking on together.
No, it's an important part of it is understanding who we're talking to at the companies, right? NIA companies tend to have people who want to lead. They want to be developing solutions. They want to be making positive changes. When we reach out to companies, I think we sort of two scenarios that we find. One is that we get to people who are absolutely excited to tell us what they're up to, and that we are empowering them and we are ensuring that the executive team understands the importance of their work to an external organization, to an investor, right? An investor. The other thing we sometimes end up with is people who are really unsure about the topic that we're raising, and they will often be pleased to have the expertise that we can bring to them to help them understand the issue area. So it's more of a who should we be talking to? What other best practices are you seeing in our field or in industry or even in our region? How do we get better at this? And we will bring to them NGOs that are experts in the areas that we want them to think about more. And I think that's a really important part of what NIA brings is this collaboration and this real focus on how do we strengthen the business and how do we support the people who are doing the work. If you think about, or if I think about an executive team, they are experts in their field and in their work, but they are not necessarily, they're not going to have PhDs in human rights or around climate change. It's not necessarily something that's a part of their everyday. And so it's really important to have an investor like Nia that's willing to come to them and say, hey, is this on your radar? If it's not, these are the main things you should be looking at. And I would say the majority of the time, companies are very, very receptive to it. We have a couple of companies, every now and then where we have to be a little bit more assertive in ensuring that our voice is heard. But most of the time, we have employees saying, oh my gosh, we're so excited you're here. I've been waiting to bring this in front of the board. Can I show you what we have ahead of time? It's good fun.
Those have been the good calls. Absolutely.
Good calls. That's right.
And, generally when we are working at companies of this size, there is a pocket or an employee group that wants to see, whether this is more diversity on the board or, in some cases, we brought up concealment clauses and looking to remove forced arbitration or NDAs from employee contracts. And largely, there's research behind why that can be actually beneficial for companies in the long run. And certainly, the ability to attract hire, retain top talent, we want to make sure that our companies are able to have the most innovative top talent teams. So we really are bringing best practices, and yet sometimes they are counter to what the status quo is. And then also making changes in big companies can there's lots of levers, there's lots of policies, there's lots of people behind each decision. And so it does seem that we have come up against resistance at times. And yet there are always groups of employees that really do want to see our voice push this forward.
Yeah, I think it's true. Often we're saying the status quo might not be the very best way to do things or the way things have always been done. we would like you to reconsider. And we're going to offer you some alternatives and some data on why those alternatives might be best. Kristen, you mentioned, that we have a very clear pandemic memory of you saying, we got the team to stuff the envelopes on a table in my front yard. Right. And so we have changed the way that we've communicated with companies. We've changed our expectations on how they respond. A lot has, a lot has changed since 2019. Are there other things you would highlight in terms of the operating environment we're in now and how
Yeah.
we're changing?
Well, I would love to say that we're setting our own agenda, and yet the Supreme Court really has, and some of these outside um, incidents have had us rise up, I think. And the stuffing of the envelopes in that case during the pandemic, it was quite a windy day. And so I'd set up these card tables in the front lawn. We were all masked up. We had to have these double each thing, and I was hand signing all of the letters and we were folding them, getting them into envelopes and whatnot. And that one was in that specific effort was in response to the George Floyd killings. And that was where you and your team had taken the time to benchmark how many CEOs were making statements about Black Lives Matter and what we wanted to know and what we were writing to our companies about. And we wrote to every company in our portfolio at the time, US domiciled as well as international companies. Um, Wanting to know whether they had made a statement or we had done our research and said, okay, we noticed you did make a statement. And then we wanted to know about the quality of the statement. What were our companies, our holdings doing for Black Lives Matter, both internally in their own companies and then also in their communities? And then we got meetings with many, many companies and we followed up with them to see what they were doing. So that was one of the efforts. And so obviously things have changed in that before it was really looking to go have a meeting in person, I think before the pandemic and trying to show up in physically in person. And so in some ways, the pandemic has really helped us now that most of our meetings have gone to Zoom and that we're not doing paper letters anymore. Because they were getting lost in mail rooms and it was really difficult to know if our communications had been received. So in that way, we're able to do more, I believe, with the email and the tech-enabled Zoom meetings.
Yeah, for sure. And a part that I think the same is the question is, what's your strategy as an organization on this topic area, and what data are you collecting or quantifying internally that you can share to show how effective you've been? That was the focus then and continues to be the focus on a lot of our conversations. But the shift to being able to talk to people, to be able to see their face, to be able to make out who is speaking has really helped in a other key part of, I think, what NIA brings to this ecosystem, which is the focus on building relationships. Kristen starts almost every call asking how people are, asking where they're calling in from. She really wants to know who she's talking to as an individual, as well as however they're representing their firm. And I think that really helps, frankly, from a negotiation strategies perspective as well. We find companies are far more willing to meet us as humans when we meet them that way also. Um, Kristen, I was going to say that things are not all rosy right now. We are in a political environment where a lot of the topic areas NIA works on are under direct attack. And so one of the things I thought we should talk about today is if the strategy is shifting, if NIA itself is thinking about its role differently, what's changing in terms of our work together.
Yeah, I
Some
think it's a
questions
great
for you, I'm
question.
sure.
And, we're getting that asked a lot. I think so many things are shifting in this political environment. And um, I love saying that we're not shifting. We really have had the same thesis since we started. And if nothing else, we're doubling down. And that we want to just be really more consistent as far as really articulating to our companies what are the material issues at stake, particularly when, the letters DE and I or ESG have come under attack and have become so polarized and so political. They're still best practices for business. the research hasn't changed as far as what is best practices and what we want to see our companies doing. So reminding our companies about why they're doing what they're doing and that there really are material business reasons behind that, regardless, I think has been really important, maybe more so now than ever.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's one of the things that I think NIA does that's really unique in the broader ecosystem is that it's willing to, well, first of all, I don't know if it's queued up for today or not, but Kristen's willing to show up literally in person at places that might be, not entirely ready to hear about social or environmental issues, as she did at the Tesla annual meeting more than once. But also, there are a lot of topic areas where we have research. We have significant amounts of research. Workplace equity is a great example. We have significant amounts of research that show it's like an empirical, back-tested, positive correlation between management diversity and financial performance over time. But you need to have an investor that's on the leading edge, willing to bring that content up in a public forum and let the community hear it and see it, so that then the institutional capital and others can step in and start to pick up on that data and start to use it.
Meredith, I think we do have that. Are we talking about playing the Tesla video
Oh,
from?
do you have it? Yes.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
And so what Paloma's queuing up for those that haven't seen it is just to put some color and a face to what Meredith is talking about, in that we have been quite active with Tesla, which is no longer in our active portfolios. So, and yet we have held some shares to be able to continue our work that I believe we started in 2019 with Tesla. And this is from last year's shareholder meeting, which was held in Austin. So I've traveled several times to Austin to present at this meeting.
Hey, I'm just landing in Texas and going to get my bag, and then I'm going to head over to One Tesla Way to the shareholder meeting happening later today. I'm just arriving here at the Gigafactory. It is hotter than hot. I am here to present at the Tesla AGM. This is such a tricky company because they really do hold the promise of a sustainable future, and yet without strong human capital management in place, we're seeing so many issues of discrimination and harassment, and we're going to ask the board to prepare a report on these issues and see how it goes.
I'm Dr. Kristen Hull of NIA Impact Capital. Our firm name NIA means intention and purpose. We invest only in those companies we see building toward a better world, a sustainable and inclusive future. As the founder of NIA, I had been proud in our early ownership of Tesla. I saw the potential and the need for innovation in the automotive and the clean energy market space. However, when looking under the frunk, we find failures in workplace management. Investors are requesting the report outlined in Proposal 8 because workplace abuse, harassment, and discrimination have no place at Tesla. We have expressed concerns about Tesla's workplace for years, and year after year, more harassment and discrimination allegations have emerged with few visible improvements in Tesla's people management policies or practices to assuage our concerns. I now formally move Proposal 8, requesting that Tesla's board commission an independent report on the effectiveness of the company's efforts to prevent harassment and discrimination within this revolutionary and innovative workspace. Thank you.
I'd like to announce the results on a preliminary basis. With respect to the 7 stockholder proposals, our stockholders have approved the recommendations of the Tesla board on all of them except for Proposal 6 and Proposal 7.
I'm back home today after presenting yesterday at the Tesla AGM, and it was intense to be in a room full of that many men who are all Tesla enthusiasts and fanboys of the CEO, and then to be giving a speech about harassment and discrimination and needing to have stronger human capital management.
I was nervous and wondering, I guess, how this crowd would receive that. And yet we did receive over 30% of the vote, meaning that investors really do care and that it is a significant issue at Tesla. So we will continue to show up, we'll continue to raise our voice, and at NIA we'll continue to be that investor that convenes others to make a difference, particularly when it comes to issues of equity and inclusion within our companies.
Paloma, thanks for sharing that. For those who hadn't seen it, that's just kind of trying to put some light and give an example of what it looks like to do some of this work. Oftentimes, shareholder engagement can be very nebulous, and so much of it happens behind the scenes. I'll say for that video, the year before I had presented, they took all the videos down and they actually didn't give me a podium or anything. At the last minute, they took the podium away and it was very awkward and they had me standing in the back of the room. So this year, I didn't memorize my speech or I didn't, I was just reading because I really was confident that I wouldn't be filmed. And of course they did. So it was, you never know what's going to happen at these events.
Kristen, do you want to talk through some of the companies that we've been able to have move forward? Tesla's a great example. Apple's another one where, first of all, large companies and companies that have more resistant cultures. So for a very kind way to say it, they don't tend to be that open to external insights and culture change.
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting, or at least that I've found that didn't really occur to me when we started this is, I think many of you know we invest across 6 solution themes. So we have some companies that are really leading on some of the sustainable planet issues, such as renewable energy. And what I've found interesting is that, they are so clear that they are saving the world with their technology, their product, their service, their solar panel, their wind turbines, their battery packs, whatever it is. And they really are. I mean, that's why we invested in them. It's because they're doing something really innovative that we see is really needed for people and planet. And yet they're so convinced that what they're doing is so good that they oftentimes don't have the full picture about possibly human capital management and what it means to attract a diverse workforce and have inclusion happening at their companies or in their governance. And then similarly, what has been surprising to me, I guess, is that some of our medical companies, biotechs, pharma, et cetera, they really are so behind their solution and they 100% feel that they are saving the world because they are working on some of the very best solutions, preventions for HIV, for some women's cancers, for some really life-threatening diseases, and they're doing an excellent job at that. And yet they're not considering sometimes some of the environmental issues, such as they're shipping their medical products in single-use plastics or things like that. And so that's been interesting, I think, for me to participate in that we really can help expand the thinking of what really is material and layering that in with what's happening in the current environment, especially with tariffs. It actually gives us almost a space or more leverage to say, single-use plastics are made in China. We're going to have tariffs of some sort at some point. We don't know when or what or how much or how often, and yet really thinking about those inputs. So being able to bring kind of a larger, wider stance, I think, to the conversations. I'm thrilled to welcome our CMO and leading on some of our sustainability issues as well is Holly Lichtenfeld. And she has been leading on our several of our engagements. And in particular, I thought, Holly, we'd have you talk about Microsoft because there are no perfect companies. And even the companies that are getting good scores on some of the sustainability measures still have work to do. So I'd love to welcome your voice. And if you could just share a little bit about your passions, about how you got to this space. Holly has a really impressive background, if you haven't looked at her bio yet, on sustainable issues. And she's actually been working in this area for I'm going to say 35 years, maybe longer than that. And if you could just share kind of what your role has been with Microsoft and then anything else about our engagement strategy that you'd like to chime in on.
Sure. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So, just to give you a little bit about what I bring when we do these engagements is I've worked in sustainability for many years, and most recently I worked at a software company that actually did greenhouse gas inventories, and I worked with companies across many inventories on there, like actually in the weeds with them figuring this out a few years ago as it was starting to get more um, momentum. So greenhouse gas inventories, water measurement, and then some getting into biodiversity. So I love bringing that perspective and really being able to understand a bit more about both being on this side as representing investors and also what it's like to be on the other side of the table as well. So specifically with Microsoft, they data centers get a lot of attention for the energy they use, and that obviously is an issue, and that's another area that we do a lot of work is in the energy space. But with Microsoft, we're currently engaging with them on their water use because that's starting to get a bit more attention. But this is a large issue where the cooling that's needed for running the data centers as we have more AI, water use is becoming a really big issue. So, Microsoft does have a goal to be water positive by 2030, and they include some of this information in their sustainability report. But as investors who engage with in dialogue with our companies that we hold in engagement, what we get to do is really ask questions and understand that because there is no definition that's held for what does water positive mean. The people who are doing it are sort of figuring out what it means themselves, the few companies that are making those goals. There's no standard understanding of that. So as investors, we can really dig in when they say how they're getting to that, how they're counting that. We can break it apart. And understand the components of it and ask questions that go beyond what they are sharing in their sustainability report. And what we've also been able to do is provide them with the kind of information that we as investors feel is important going forward for them to add to their reporting. So this is an ongoing dialogue that takes place. I've also reached out and spoken to some university professors, researchers who are working in this area so that we really have a full understanding, going pretty deep on how much water can they recycle? Are they recycling water? All these different parts of it. And I think as investors, we understand this is a material component to their business because if they're operating in an area of water risk, that's really important. If they're going to put stress on the communities there, that has so many levels of importance to it. And water also is such a important building block of biodiversity and retaining nature. So it's the water itself, but then it's everything else around it. So I'm really excited to be part of the outreach and the conversations that we're having.
The research, I think, is a really key component of this. One of Whistle Stop's sort of founding beliefs is that if we're asking for a change, a sustainability change that in itself is not able to be sustained by the company, as in something that's harming the company, we're working at purposes against ourselves. The company won't maintain whatever we've asked it to do. It will be pissed the next time we ask it to do something else. So it will be sort of building all the bridges we needed to build, burning all the bridges we need to build. So a big part of what we do before any conversation with any company is to make sure we really understand what is the concern, what's the sustainability concern, and then where is its strongest intersection with that business, that specific business, so that we can go to the company and say, hey, this is where we see the greatest possible harm. This is where we see the greatest possible benefit or opportunity. How are you looking at it? What do you know? Because you are inside of your own organization. How do you see it from your vantage point? What challenges are you facing? And having a productive conversation where we're bringing that data to them and really able to move forward. Kristen mentioned it earlier. We do a lot of benchmarking research. Companies really care what their peers are up to. On certain issues, we can convince them to be leaders. They want to be the very best in whatever the topic area is. In certain issues, they're just trying to avoid being the worst, which maybe not the most, we're not the most proud of that mentality, but it's just the truth of how companies work. And so we can bring them that data that says, hey, you got to pick up your pace if you want to be not not behind the group or pick up your pace because someone else is coming up behind and they're going to get the advantage. So the data and the research is so essential. And then if we have it, and it's good research, we spend a lot of time making sure the research and the analysis is strong. Then when we go to the companies, NIA companies in particular, because of who NIA chooses to invest in, those conversations are not intensive, right? Because we are building relationships over time. We try to talk to every company in the NIA portfolio at least once a year. Many of them we talk to more often than that. And we're bringing them data. It's an evolving story. What are you finding challenges with? Scope 3, Holly touched lightly on climate. Scope 3 emissions has been a really challenging area for around greenhouse gases. So it's not direct emissions, it's the emissions that are related to essentially customer use, primarily customer use. How does a company calculate that? We've had a lot of conversations with our companies about how to address that challenge, how to reduce their Scope 3 emissions. They want to have those conversations. There's only it is a very small subset of the NIA companies where it takes a lot of time for them to hear us. And, Tesla is a fine example of a company where it took years and years for the board to hear us, but then they responded. They made the change we were looking for, and that was to increase the human rights oversight and the human capital oversight at the board level. There are some companies, Holly is a great example, Microsoft, where they have an open door with their stakeholders, and it speaks really well to the company from my perspective, is that they don't always make the change you're looking for, but they are looking for your data. They're looking to understand your rationale, and they do take it seriously. So you can have a lot more confidence that they're managing the topic well because they are not turning a blind eye to it. So I hope that answers the question, Ali. Let us know.
I just thank you for that. So I was trying to understand a little bit, maybe Kristen, you can speak to this. I know that you have a wonderful but not large staff. So if I'm understanding correctly, how you figure out how to allot time in your office to the heavy research, are you outsourcing to Whistle Stop? Or how do you apportion your team's time to be smart at so many issues that you're bringing up with companies?
Oh, it's a great question. So I guess it's called outsourcing. Yeah. So they are consultants to us, and they do quite a bit of research. And then we are research minded. The firm was founded by a researcher and an academic. So that is a large part of what we do, and we really enjoy that. And the issues really do translate. So particularly when it's human capital management, there's really a set of best practices. And sometimes it changes across geographies, and certainly cap sizes as far as how large companies are. And yet getting some of these best practices instituted really does translate across companies for the most part. And then similarly, we want all of our companies tracking their water use. We want to know what all of our companies are thinking about Native American tribes and communities and how they're interacting with them. So the questions oftentimes are getting them thinking. And then just to Meredith's point, this is something that was actually really disappointing to me when we started this work many years ago, is that our companies absolutely want to be leading when it comes to innovation for their products and services. They're very proud. And again, we've chosen the best companies from our viewpoint in these various areas. And so they're very proud of that. And so we do start each call commending them for what they're doing well. Certainly, having been a teacher and doing parent-teacher conferences before this job, I bring a lot of that to this. And so you always start with a compliment, when you are meeting with parents of their child. And so this is their baby oftentimes. And so we want to start with something. And we genuinely do have that because we do admire these companies. And that's why they're in the portfolio. Again, we're not going after the companies that we think are doing lots of harm, to the environment, to people, et cetera, because we don't hold those. So NIA does invest for the world we want to see. So we are putting client capital into the solutions. And then we're just trying to help those solutions, actively working to have those solutions be better. So at any rate, when we're talking to these companies, they are very proud of what they're doing, and we get to commend them on that. And then we get to ask them about, have you considered this? And we'd like to see better practices when it comes to recruitment, or practice or whatever it is that we've researched. To your point, we've done quite a bit of research before we get there, and Whistle Stop certainly helps us with that. And then what's been disappointing is that just to Meredith's point, many of them, I call them middle schoolers because they want to be right in the middle. They do not want to stand out. And they say, well, what are our peers doing? And in that case, Whistle Stop's been really tremendously supportive because we're able to tell them what their peers are doing. And they don't want to be too far ahead. Many of them. Some of them are very proud to be ahead and leading when it comes to human capital management. And yet most of them, to Meredith's point, don't want to be a laggard. They don't want to be the worst, but they want to be kind of right in the middle of the pack. And how can NIA support them to get there?
The other thing to know in terms of Whistle Stop and the research we can bring to NIA is that our business model has us working with asset managers and owners and advisors on one portion of our business. The other portion is that we're working directly with NGOs and activist organizations to understand their topics of concern. So we are creating bespoke and unique research around specific issue areas because those organizations at the forefront of those topic areas have come to us and said, essentially, help us build out our understanding of where or why investors would care the most. So we work with Natural Resources Defense Council, Planned Parenthood, with HRC. We worked with Oxfam in the past, right? And so on. We work with an animal rights organization. And for each of these entities and topic areas, we then are able to bring, basically NIA gets access to this wide pool of data and knowledge that they wouldn't, not that, I mean, the in-house staff at NIA is amazing. So, but it's just, we allow them to broaden out from what they'd be able to have just internally, given what we do as a business.
Yeah, we're really proud of this partnership, and obviously, you're hearing that Whistle Stop brings quite a bit to our research process, particularly in the benchmarking of looking at companies outside of our portfolios.
Laurel, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, guys. Great call so far. I just wanted to kind of follow up on some of the things that you pursue, like with Tesla and getting the board to do things differently. Then do you look at how that leads to improved workforce treatment, or has it led to that? Or how can you look at that after you accomplish something like you did with Tesla?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So we do look to have a follow-up call to see once they have adopted what this practice is. And in this case, we had been looking to have Tesla examine their use of forced arbitration because we had so many incidents of employees literally coming to us sharing incidents of discrimination. And so and that actually largely we started to kind of get a little gist of that in 2019 and then more in 2020 and 2021. And so at any rate, they have not removed forced arbitration. So one of the great parts about working with Whistle Stop is we get to do lots of great strategy together. And so in this case, we, with Meredith's support, shifted gears a little bit. And instead of asking them to remove this concealment clause, we asked the board to oversee and be responsible and be named as being responsible for human capital management and oversight. And so that happened. They put that in their 10K in January. And so we're just a few months out. So we will look to see what changes are made there and hope to have a report from them. And yet that is not known. None of this is binding when they make these changes. So there isn't anything like, oh, we'll have a report that we can share out with you in 6 months. So there will be, and that's also goes back to one of the reasons we want to have the relationship. And I'll just go back to, I believe it was Sunrun, though, correct me, Meredith, this is a while ago. We had several companies where we're working on removing the use of forced arbitration because when forced arbitration came in, I want to say it was 30s and 40s, it really was considered business practices as far as, oh, if there's a business quarrel or issue, we'll just solve it. We'll save, the courts were overloaded. We'll just do this with arbitration, not a big deal. And at that time, literally, it was all white men at the table solving for white men issues, and they really could just do that with arbitration. And I don't think that it was a nefarious practice when it actually got widely adopted to become kind of the standard. And yet now that we have women and people of color, we are seeing that it may inadvertently cover issues of harassment and discrimination. So we do want to see that as a best practice removed, and yet we need to be able to show and benchmark that. At any rate, it took us a while to convince Sunrun that this would be a best practice for them. And when that finally happened, and they did, when they saw that we encouraged Apple to remove NDAs, they wrote us and they called and they said, "Hey, high five, Nia, great work. This is good." So it took us a while to get them on board, and now they're on board for everybody. So it was that's been encouraging. There might be other stories like that, Meredith, that we might want to share with people.
Yeah, I'll think about those. The other thing I was gonna say, Laurel, is that like there's a big difference between like the perfect, the good, and the possible. And a lot of what we need to do, or a lot of the work we do, is identifying what our goals are, identifying what's a reasonable shift, and then really identifying. Tesla is a great example of where can we actually get this company to go given the current operating environment. Tesla is unique in how investors view it, and we needed to take that into consideration in the request we made of the organization. Kristen's talking about asking companies to stop forcing arbitration. Not just that they can use arbitration if everybody's in agreement, but if they're forcing an employee into arbitration or they're forcing them into a non-disclosure agreement, then we're uncomfortable with that. And there's secondary steps to it. So if we have a company that's no longer, we call them concealment clauses, no longer holding concealment clauses in place, we are reassured because we will now know cases and lawsuits and allegations. But we also ask companies to share things like the workforce diversity, and we ask them to share their hiring, their retention, and their promotion rates of their employees. So all of this data together allows us to understand the workplace and how well it's working. And then, not surprisingly, we gather up that data and we analyze it to see if, suggestions or recommendations we can make. Kristen did mention there are definitely companies where we might have started off. Sunrun's a great example where they weren't exactly excited to have us showing up asking them to change a practice that they felt sort of safe in. It was for them at that point in time. It was a risk reduction measure. General counsels are often the person whose job it is to say, hey, anything voluntary is dangerous. And we really have to talk them through, why is it appropriate to take on that risk? What are the benefits of taking on that risk for your workforce? And are those benefits greater than general counsel's ability to see risk? General counsel is not an opportunity oriented position. And so that's actually very much a part of what we have to push through in our conversations. Kristen, I thought it would be kind of fun. One of the things that has happened over the years is that as we have these conversations, we learn a lot of quantitative data, but we also learn a lot of qualitative data about the companies. And that goes into your security selection process and how you weight and how you decide to hold a company. So I thought I would tee you up to talk a little bit about the extra insights that this process brings.
Sure. Well, I'll just say, getting to know people and how they show up for a Zoom. Can they make the meeting on time? Can they coordinate with us? Some of these are very basic things. How willing are they to talk to an investor? But then also when you start asking them about scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and they're not showing any interest, and when we're talking to them about, climate extreme weather and how that might affect their own sales, their own manufacturing, their own any of these, and they're not showing interest, then I'm thinking of a company that was a biotech company a while ago where we were really excited about what they could bring as far as solutions. And yet the way they handled the resolution our engagements with, I guess I'll just call it a lack of expertise and a lack of really being able to handle their business, had us losing confidence, and so then is this one of the cases you're thinking of, or what? Tell me what else.
Talking about the same one, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it was we really tried to support this company in the ways that we saw them lagging, and they were disorganized, and it none of this you could have seen on a Bloomberg printout. This was all gave us a lot more insight into the company, which then had us losing confidence in the company, and had, we ultimately exited the position and removed it from the portfolio, really based on us trying to get to know them and support them in some of these ways. And then I'll just say a flip side, we have another company which we've actually added to the portfolio in some reasons based on our engagements, and they were not leading, but they actually said to us, wow, we are freshmen when it comes to some of this. Can you share more of your research? Can you share more? And how else can we do this? And can we have another call next quarter so that we can check in on this? And so those give us some insights about how willing they are to learn, how willing they are to be adaptive and to adjust, and to really incorporate best practices. So I would say that's an edge that we have, that we really love getting to know, what's going on, kind of as a pulse check even.
Kristen, I was thinking, I'm just looking at time. If folks have questions for us, I hope they'll just pipe up by chat or with their hand. But I think maybe we can talk a little bit more about what's changing right now, because we are in a very different environment, and companies are very hesitant to be public. They're very worried about being targeted. They're very worried about losing contracts if they're federal contractors. They're nervous about the language they can use, especially as it relates to workplace equity, but also around climate. And it has, I will say, at least for Whistle Stop, it has shifted what we view as our role as the investor voice. And not just sort of that, just your reflections on the investor's voice in this window of time, given that we have this hopefully temporary schism, and I would say extreme overreach of politics into what's happening on the Capitol side.
Yeah. So it's certainly tricky times, and companies are, I mean, everyone kind of doing the good work is under siege. And so we have seen websites changing. We have seen, pulling, different vocabulary, different types of commitments from websites. And so and this we kind of started to talk about a little bit about in the beginning of this, that having those relationships, being able to go back, being able to say, this is really important. Here's the research again. We see it's not on your website. Can you still tell us, and can you recommit to, some of these best practices, particularly when it comes to human capital management? And I'll just bring up, and we could put this in the chat as well. We actually have a sign-on letter currently with Lowe's. And this is a company where we've had a really good call. They are actually known for some human capital management, and they have quite a good reputation. And we've actually talked to them about their Scope 3 emissions and how they're really looking to have items on the shelf for customers that have low water washing machines. And so they're really conscious of how they are affecting their Scope 3 emissions and the influence that they have over consumers in what they offer. And we've had some quite good calls and relations, and yet we are finding out that they are contracting with and using some different security in their parking lots, and what this is doing with their own clients, actually, because these are people that shop at Lowe's and work for Lowe's, and being reported to ICE and the police. And so we have a sign-on letter now, and actually maybe we can get that into the chat. If not, I believe it's on our social medias. And so this is certainly something that I didn't anticipate, where an investor voice would be needed, and I'm guessing there will be more as we move forward.
Yeah, I think there likely will be. And it's very important for Lowe's to know that people are watching and that their investors are watching, and their investors don't view this to be in the business's best interest. It's such an essential reminder of these companies, why these topics matter, and that they are not, they're not doing this work under a cloak of darkness, that they're being watched, and that there will be financial repercussions, that may hit their bonus, and may hit their equity awards, and really want them thinking about those topics still. The other side of it, I think, is that we have companies that know they can't speak publicly, but really want to know how other companies within the NIA portfolio are solving problems. And so we have had a lot of conversations, particularly around women's reproductive health, where companies were saying, what else are you hearing? Who's doing what? How are they navigating through this? Because they can't have public conversations at all. And they because they're so worried about the political blowback there.
I was just going to say, we've seen this, many of us have in the news, just the issues with Target and how their stance, as far as removing their DEI commitments, has really tarnished their brand in a place where sales are dropping, across the country, not just on the more liberal coasts, and where those same shoppers are flocking to Costco because they have embraced and stood out. And I'll just point out, this wasn't our work, though it was a shareholder resolution that had Costco come out strongly and looking really good. And it wasn't that Costco's board, I've actually had a conversation with the board, and they said this wasn't our idea. We weren't going to announce all of this. And yet a shareholder brought this resolution and, specifically about DEI. And so they came out looking really strong, and it's really supported their brand.
Yeah, the anti-DEI resolutions have been a real benefit to our work because we had 98% of investors being very consistent in saying, actually, workplace equity and workplace inclusion is a good thing, and it's really important. Maybe, Kristen, it's a great way to end is, what do you feel optimistic about?
Oh, I feel, well, one, our work together, and that you and I are committed, and our teams are committed to learning and growing and adapting as times come. And then I'm optimistic about how what we are offering to companies and requesting and asking and sometimes demanding of companies really are the best practices for capitalizing on and working on the transition to the next just, sustainable, and inclusive economy. And our companies really are leading there. So there can be dark days, particularly when you turn on the news, and yet this work, as you mentioned earlier, the employees within these companies feel seen, and we give them the empowerment that they need. And then I think teaching this work to our Change the Face of Finance interns also gives me a lot of hope. So I have a lot of hope in our young staff and in our young interns who are, they know that we get the economy we invest in, and they want it to be a sustainable, inclusive one for them and their children. So that gives me hope. And I think our investors, our clients and our investors get so excited about this, and they are really here showing up with their aligning their dollars. That also gives me hope.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. I think this is a time where we have to be patient. We're not seeing everything we want all at once, but we are laying the groundwork to do this well for the long term. And those, the seeds we are planting now will bear fruit. I have very strong confidence in that.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. We're at the top of the hour. So appreciate your interest in our work. And of course, we hope to see you at either another webinar soon or an in-person soon. And would love to have you, check us out on our website or ask us for any information. And thank you for, it's going to take all of us to move us forward. So thanks for showing up today.
Thanks.